Greetings all who are part of this. My name is Terry Lovett. I'm an emeritus professor from the University of Newcastle, and it's my great honour to introduce our speakers today and perhaps to insert some of my own ideas as questions flow towards the end of the session. I'd first of all like to acknowledge the various lands on which we are today and their custodians past, present and emerging. Welcome to this webinar sponsored by the Herbert and Valmay Freilich Project for the Study of Bigotry. The Freilich Project, centred at the Australian National University, supports research into the causes, the histories and the effects of ethnic, cultural, religious and sexual bigotry and animosity. And very pertinent to today, it promotes public discussion of how such intolerance can be combated, including through educational programs and educational means. The research into religious bullying that our two speakers will unpick today fits well with the charter of the Freilich Project. I'll speak especially to religious education in both its general and special forms as an educational means by which such bullying might be flushed out, faced, resolved even. Australian and certainly New South Wales public education has a vexed history when it comes to religion being dealt with in any explicit way in the public curriculum. Keeping it under the table rather than on it might be a way of capturing the thinking. Early on in our history, religion and indeed morals or values, for whatever reason, came to be seen as something that religious schools might deal with, but government schools definitely should not. Education's about facts, not values, I was once told by a very angry departmental head in a government school. Keeping religion and values under the table was somehow considered proper to the charter of the public school. That way it was said religious conflict could be avoided. I think our speakers' research today shows the folly of such an approach. Perhaps it was always a folly. If not, it's certainly a folly today. It's interesting to me that even in a day and age that generally advocates putting all sorts of things on the table, including once highly vetoed topics, I mean, all the way to transgender as an example, there persists a belief that religion is best kept under it. What sort of crazy doublethink is that? I think we'll find today from our speakers' research just what sort of doublethink it is. Without further ado, can I introduce our eminent speakers? Firstly, Professor Zahavat Gross, who is a Professor and Director of the Joseph Berg Chair in Education for Human Values, Tolerance and Peace, and Head of the Specialisation in Management and Development of Non-Formal Education Systems at Bar-Ilan University, Ramat Gan, Israel. And Professor Gross is speaking to us today from Israel. Professor Gross has been particularly active in developing programs that draw together Jewish and Palestinian youth and especially young tertiary students. And she's been a veritable pioneer in that field, recognised as such all the way to UNESCO. Professor Suzanne Rutland is a Professor Emerita in the Department of Hebrew, Biblical and Jewish Studies at the University of Sydney. She's a renowned Australian Jewish historian, has published widely on Australian Jewish history. In 2008, Professor Rutland received the Medal of the Order of Australia from the Australian Government for services to higher Jewish education and interfaith dialogue. Professors Gross and Professor Rutland will today be giving a dual presentation, and I invite them, their eminent selves, to speak to us now. There'll be time for Q&A in about half an hour's time. Professor Gross and Rutland.
Thank you very much, Professor Terry Lovett. Thank you for your wonderful introduction. My name is Professor David Gross, and I'm the chairholder for UNESCO Chair for Values Education, Tolerance and Peace in the School of Education, Bar-Ilan University. For 25 years, I've been the facilitator of a conflict resolution course between Jewish and Palestinian students at Bar-Ilan University. As a facilitator, I always struggle, should I raise the religious factor in my classes or should I ignore it? Religion is the elephant, religion is the elephant, just 1 minute, sorry. Religion is the elephant in the room. And my question is, should I put it on the table or under the table? In the 60s, in the last century, the first was the secularization hypothesis. Which argue been disproved with 9/11 and other bitter events that we have experienced in our decade. My question as an educator is, can we ignore the religious factor and say it's an issue that should not be discussed at government schools? As an educator, I must acknowledge the fact that in our era, religion is still a major actor which has a huge impact on the political climate and atmosphere all over the world. And unfortunately, according to our research, religious bullying is one of the main phenomena we need to be aware of in government schools in Australia as well as elsewhere. In this webinar, we shall discuss the problem of religious bullying in the playground, an issue not dealt with significantly in the literature. Reports in the media of the problems of bullying in the school playground based on religious affiliation have recently multiplied. We shall argue that a combination of SRE, special religious education, with GRE or worldview education can assist in countering racism and religious prejudice in our schools. Suzanne?
Thank you, Zavit. Firstly, we're giving a definition of racism. So the United Kingdom Department of Education and Skills has defined it as a range of hurtful behavior, both psychological and physical, that makes a person feel unwelcome, marginalized, excluded, powerless or worthless because of their color, ethnicity, culture, faith, community, national origin, or national status. The New South Wales government has added to this, stressing that racism can take many forms, such as jokes or comments that cause offense or hurt. Sometimes they're unintentional by the school kids, but then there can be name calling or verbal abuse, harassment or intimidation, or commentary in the media or online that inflames hostility towards certain groups. At its most serious, racism can result in acts of physical abuse and violence. As you all know, we're now in multicultural and multi-faith Australia. As this graph shows, the growing religious diversity of the Australian population. And we have, research has found, not our research, but from McCrindle and other researchers, that most Australians, at least 60%, still identify with some sort of religion or spiritual belief. If we look at the countries, the 5 top immigration countries for Australia in 2018, we can see the mix of religions with India and both India and Nepal with Hinduism, China with folk religion, we see the Philippines with Roman Catholicism, we see Islam, and we also see a growth, significant growth in Buddhism. So that today, about 52% of Australia's population identify as Christians, 8% as other religions, 30% as no religion, but 10% don't state, and therefore the odds are they have some sort of religious connection, but we don't know. Definitely 60%. So and as I've just mentioned, events such as September 11, but also the recent attacks, have to think about it, New Zealand in mosques, Sri Lanka in churches, the United States, violent attacks against synagogues. They remind us that religion is still a major factor in the 21st century. And that means, and Terry has stated this very clearly, that there's a challenge today in terms of the relationship between state and religion. And therefore, we are arguing that we need to revisit the role of religious education within government schools. Multiculturalism was adopted in Australia in the 1970s with the aim of building social cohesion. However, at that time, and really until today, the focus has been on ethnic differences, not considering religious diversity. So, given Australia's changing religious landscape, the focus of multiculturalism needs to be broadened to include religious differences. This is also important when thinking about education in schools within the context of a multicultural and democratic education policy. Children belonging to different religious groups should have the opportunity to receive education in line with their own religion. Over to you, Zavid.
Yeah. In faith education, there are actually two approaches to religious education. In faith education, also known as special religious education, or religious instruction, RI, is for religion where students have the opportunity to explore their own faith, spirituality, and heritage. And we have general religious education, GRE, and it is about religion, where students learn about different religions in mixed religious classes. There is a need for both SRE-RI and GRE. SRE and RI provide an opportunity for students to explore their own spirituality and identity. It gives a safe place to explore the question of faith and spirituality. And GRE promotes social cohesion through teaching about values, about various religions in a multicultural environment. In terms of Islamophobia, Dita Inner produced a detailed report in 2018 where she devoted one chapter to anti-Muslim attacks in the playground. In the US, CARE has produced a guide for Muslim parents. Mariam de Sosa noted that some schools have a high proportion of Muslim students due to what she describes as ethnic clustering. She notes that when Muslim children are bullied, they experience a sense of alienation and found themselves as a displaced people within what they perceive to be their own country. We have highlighted the problem of bullying based on religious affiliation in our longitudinal study of Jewish SRE that we undertook between 2009 and 2015, resulting in two key academic articles and leading to our present study. Dani Ben Moshe undertook a similar study in Canberra. Now, in terms of methodology, we investigated this issue building on our earlier research on playground anti-Semitism through a qualitative research project with 58 interviews with directors, teachers, and graduates, either in individually or in focus groups of the 6 main faith groups: Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, Judaism, and Baha'i. Volunteers were canvassed through Better Balanced Futures, a multi-faith group established in 2015 in response to the New South Wales review of SRE. All our participants were extremely keen to participate and were very supportive of the study. Our questionnaire, we asked about multiculturalism and how SRE assists students in responding to any prejudice against religion. Our findings focus on the responses to this question in this webinar. Yes, Suzanne.
Now, thank you, Zavit. I'm now going to briefly on findings. Happy to, we can answer more in the question time, but we did want to leave time for discussion. So firstly, we found that religious bullying in the playground affects members of the 4 main faith communities: Muslim, Hindus, Jews, and believing Christians. With Buddhists and with the Buddhists and Baha'i, where there was bullying, it was more on a ethnic basis than a religious basis. For Muslim children, dealing with Islamophobia can be very difficult, especially when girls have their hijabs torn off or mocked, torn off often when they're traveling on public transport. And boys resent being called terrorists all the time. Similarly, Hindu girls can be bullied for having the Bindi or wearing other Hindu symbols, which can also be desecrated on school grounds. In addition, sorry, I think I've jumped something, Christian students, that's right, Christian students who follow their faith, who are religious Christians, can also suffer badly from teasing in the playground. Hence, even though they're considered to be part of the mainstream, majority Christian society, they still suffer from prejudice and discrimination. Jewish children also suffer from serious bullying in the classroom. In Melbourne, a year ago, it was even ending in physical violence in one particular case. But this is the type of thing which happens with, for example, a youth leader who's speaking to one of the children in her group, and he says he hates going to English class. And she asks why, and he says, well, every time I walk into English, 2 boys stand up and say, Heil Hitler to me. Interviewer, they what? Child said, Heil Hitler. Oh. So she commented, in schools which were more multiculturalism, the anti-Semitism was more under the surface, but it still existed. As a result, whichever school she went into, she was greeted as a celebrity by the Jewish children, Jewish students in high school. So, oops, sorry about that. Decide to try and go into the web link. If we don't provide religious education within government schools, it means that the students will get their information elsewhere, from the streets, particularly from their peers and from social media. The welfare and education of, and this is a quote from a Muslim SRE teacher, Laila Khaled, who's presently doing her doctorate. The welfare and education of Muslim youth raised in Australia should be a concern to parents, educators, and society at large. Muslim youth have unjustifiably been affected by the destructive realities of Islamophobia. To make matters more complex, Muslim youth have developed issues of identity and belonging. Some are involved in drugs, crime, and more recently, violent extremism. It's really worth reading Dita Inner's report on, and particularly the chapter dealing with bullying of Muslim school children. Now, how do the students react? In our study, we found 2 major reactions. Some children do not want the other kids to know their religious affiliation. They hide it. And others strongly identify and look forward to SRERI classes, seeing meeting their friends there as a safe place. Fits in with Daniel Mullen's United Kingdom study of the Abrahamic faiths, where he found across the three faiths, 3 levels. He found there were some who were religiously identity seeking, but they didn't want the other kids to know about their religion. There were those who were religiously identity declaration. In other words, they strongly identified and they said it publicly in front of other children. And finally, the religiously identity masking. They didn't want the other kids to know. So what were the responses of the teachers? We found that there was a real tendency for the schools. Firstly, whilst there are policies in place in terms of bullying in the playground, they're very broad. They don't specify in terms, apart from the Indigenous Australians, which of course is very, very important for our First Nations, but they don't specify about the concept of religious bullying. And one of our interviews said, sadly, as far as I know, religious bullying is so entrenched in school environments, that teachers often do nothing about it, and students do not tell teachers or their parents about it either. The other problem is that in my brief experience, I've noticed that some teachers do hold deep and sometimes well hidden religious prejudices. Even if something is raised, I'm not sure anything would be done about it. So our findings show that there's a strong disconnect between the official levels of classroom practice and what is actually happening in the playground. As Kathy Schollenberg noted in her study, there's sort of this ideal school where there won't be bullies, homophobia, racism, etc. But when she did her research, she found that to try and prevent these things, she found that she was frustrated by the lack of concrete success, whatever the reason, student or adult resistance, an already jammed plate of activities and missions, or lack of follow through. And what we found was that there was a real culture of denial in terms of religious discrimination and bullying from the playground. And it's interesting that some children even went to other scripture classes so that the kids would not know their real scripture. And this sort of failure to recognize the problem was also highlighted in a study in South Australia by Dew and Riggs, where the teachers insisted that the English-speaking and non-English-speaking students were interacting in the playground. But the researchers, from their research of what was happening in the playground, showed that this did not match their observations. As well, parents, we found, either that they denied or, and it's not clear why, was it a matter of repression? Or was it due to the fact that they see such religious prejudice as normal and feel that they don't have to comment on it? And we found this, the teachers commenting on parental denial across the different religious faiths. So the problem is that the denial, which looks like a defense mechanism, but if a problem is not even recognized, it's not even possible to develop strategies to resolve it. The denial by educators of religious children being attacked in the playground on the basis of their ethnic or religious identity is very problematic, because playground places remain important sites where children learn about social hierarchies and encounter cross sections of the society. As well, only recently has verbal bullying been classified as violent behaviour. Previously, the community focused on physical violence alone. It is recognised that incitement to hatred is a low form of violence and that eventually it can lead to physical as well as verbal attacks. It's important to stress that we found there were similar responses to the problem from Muslims, Hindus, Jews, and religious Christians in the attacks in the playground and the school environment. Zabir, over to you.
Okay, 1 minute. Where are you?
Number 31, recommendations.
Yeah, no, but
We've lost you, Zavit, I'm afraid.
okay. According to German education expert Schweitzer, what he is called cooperative religious education incorporates the two frameworks of SRE and GRE discussed earlier. To have a safe place to explore their own identity and learn from a teacher of their own religion through SRE-RI. General religious education can draw on the aspects of compassion and universalism present in all major faith traditions to further promote peace and tolerance. Children have the opportunity to interact with children of different religious backgrounds. This promotes open dialogue between those of other cultures and religions through GRE. A combination of both SRE-RI and GRE can help students cultivate an understanding of themselves and their own religion, as well as an understanding of others. This can help to multiculturalize schools. And this is a new term that we actually coined in our research, to multiculturalize. Given Australia's changing religious landscape, the focus of multiculturalism need to be broadened to include religious differences. And in our research, we differentiate between thin multiculturalism and thick multiculturalism. Thin multiculturalism is actually generalized moral discourse, which ignores unique aspects of culture and religion, and thick multiculturalism acknowledges the moral, ethical, and religious values which are unique to each human group. These two types of religious education play a key role in strengthening social cohesion. In this way, government schools offering SRE-RI and GRE are the ideal setting for children to develop an understanding of peace and tolerance. Students need to be empowered to develop their own identity and 1 minute. There's a problem here. And understanding
Zavit, you've muted yourself. And your video also isn't working. I don't know.
Okay, now,
now
is it okay?
Yeah. We can't see you, but it doesn't matter.
Okay.
More important.
Yes, now it's okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Students need to be empowered to develop their own identity and understand their place in the broader society. SRE-RI aims to assist students in constructing their own identity through appreciating their religious and cultural heritage. SRE-RI can use this as a basis to teach through the different moral and social obligations placed on them. The concept of a safe place is an integral part of students developing their own social identity. This exploration of students' own religious heritage enables the construction of a safe place in government schools for students to develop their unique religious identity. Multiculturalism continues to be important. Religion is a key component of cultural heritage. Religious education is therefore vital to maintaining Australians' rich multicultural diversity. SRERI provides an opportunity to incorporate a multicultural emphasis into the school curriculum, playing a crucial role in strengthening multiculturalism in our schools. Continuing to offer parents choice ensures that this multiculturalism is integrated in a way that maintains parents' autonomy. It's very important to emphasize that we're talking about parental choice. Parental choice is a key issue in this general issue of SRERI. Government schools provide an environment where students of different backgrounds study together. Through multicultural education, GRE can help to reduce stereotyping and discrimination. Research has demonstrated that 4 core values are important in the classroom: trust, respect, care, and safety. These are key values for reflective teaching and religious education. Gross and Rutland found all these 4 values were fostered in the Jewish SRE classrooms. The teachers built an atmosphere of trust with the children who felt free to express their feelings and dilemmas. So there's respect for the differing levels of the students' beliefs and home practices in a non-judgmental fashion, and created an atmosphere of care and safety in the SRERI classrooms. As well, we found an additional 5th core value, which is developing a sense of belonging, which was a sense of belonging, which was particularly important for those children who were bullied for their religious beliefs. These 5 core values need to be incorporated into the SRE professional development program. Governments need to consider for SRERI better teacher accreditation, development, and evaluation, the need for monitoring, transparency, and accountability, significant need for more government involvement in the implementation of SRE. There is a need for a better understanding among teachers of cultural diversity and any specific cultural and religious issues facing their own school population. They need to take action when a problem is revealed. Teachers need to be aware of the importance of providing a zone. The teaching learning experience can be seen as a matter of security and protection, as a protective shield against possible storms in the outside world. SRE feels an important form. SRE feels an important role for minority groups such as the Hindus, Baha'is, and Jewish children. We need to develop strategies through simulation games, group discussions, creative drama, and other informal education techniques. Learn from case studies, bring children from different ethnic groups together so that children can learn to understand cultures and not fear ethnic and religious differences. It is also important to educate not only classroom teachers, but also school principals about how to respond in a positive fashion to problems of racial discrimination that occur in the playground. Our findings show that the principals involved responded with denial. Hence, better strategies need to be developed to acknowledge religious problems in the playground and to establish better policies for handling complaints. This is also very important. While there are many programs in schools that attempt to address the issue of bullying and racial discrimination, our research has demonstrated that these are generally not followed up, do not refer to specific ethnic groups, and are not successful in relation to students of different religious faith traditions. Schools need to educate children explicitly about the problem of negative stereotypes, initiate systematic intervention programs to combat stereotypes of all ethnic groups. Bullying is first and foremost a violation of human rights. This is really very important to remember. While there is a general understanding that this can be an integral part of the school curriculum in teacher education agendas, there is less awareness, and in many cases, actual denial or minimization with regard to the religious bullying of children. The claim is consistently made by principals and teachers that such attacks were just part of a normal children's behavior in the playground, but this is an inadequate response. I believe us, we heard this with our ears, and it was right. Principals told us that it's a normal behavior of children in the playground. This is unacceptable. Yes, Suzanne.
Sorry, last slide.
Prevalence of racial stereotypes in Australia could also apply to ASEANs and the indigenous population, both of whom are associated with long-standing negative images dating back to 19th century Australia. There has been insufficient research as to how this phenomena manifests itself in the playground, both in relation to general racism as well as specific anti-religious bullying. To what extent are children influenced by their peers, and to what extent are they influenced by their home background and other factors in society? Through our research, we have shown that children are being religiously bullied. However, more research is needed on playground religious discrimination, including the reasons why children need to display such prejudice and the way different ethnic groups are affected by religious stereotyping. This will contribute to the development of strategies to break this vicious circle. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professors Gross and Rutland, very much for that very clear presentation. We do have around about 15 minutes now for a little bit of Q&A, if people would like to ask a question. I have some comments to make, not just to fill in the space, but this is very much something close to my heart as well. But first of all, I'd like to give the audience the opportunity. We don't seem to have any questions in the chat site.
Maybe people can just indicate, put your hands up. I can't.
Yep.
I can't see a gallery view.
No, we don't seem to have a gallery view, so it's hard. I don't have a gallery view. Melissa might.
Hello, everyone. Melissa Lovell, the convener of the project. Please to send your questions through the chat function. It's a feature of the webinar that.
We look for questions because we are looking forward for questions because this is really a very challenging issue. and a very hot issue also here in Israel. So we will be very happy to listen, to answer, and to share our experience, because we practically sat in the classes. We know exactly how it works. So we can really and truly cope with those important practical or theoretical questions which the audience are going to ask us.
Well, we have one from Andrea Morris, who asks, do students who are actively practicing a religion, are they more likely or less likely to bully others? So this is, we're looking at the bully. Is the bully more likely to be a religious practitioner or not? Do you have that data?
It's a very interesting question. I have done in a separate research study is more looking at schools with Muslim majority children, where you have individual Jewish children in those schools. And sadly to say, Jewish children in that environment have really suffered. Now, the problem is that it's impossible to answer. Is it because the Muslim kids are more religious, or is it simply because they've been exposed to negative stereotypes about Jews? And so I think that it's not so much a function of whether someone themselves is religious or not religious, but rather the way they're influenced by stereotypical views. And what we found, again, with Jewish children, but for sure it's happening with other children, is that these views can be passed down in the playground. And the example we found was with the coin story, where children, Jewish children today, and we found this in both Sydney and Melbourne, but Dr. Danny Ben Moshe also found it in Canberra. Jewish kids have a coin thrown in front of them. They're told, go on, Jew, pick it up. Well, believe it or no, I have a cartoon from the Bulletin from the late 19th century showing exactly that type of story. So I think that what's happening here is more, in this case, peer pressure. And I don't know whether, maybe David knows of any evidence, if a person is more religious, are they more likely to bully others or less likely to bully others? I don't know the answer. David, do you know?
Yeah, I want to add something. I think that this question is really a very brilliant question, because I think that the hidden assumption of the participant who asked this question is that perhaps religious people are more fundamentalist from secular, and probably religious people have the tendency to bully more than secular people. Forget about it. Forget about it. In this research, what we have found is, amazingly, we found out many secular fundamentalists. Can you believe? Secular fundamentalists. People who define themselves as secular, but they are really very, very narrow-minded, and they cannot overcome their stereotypes about religion and about things which are connected to this specific thing. So I think that we have to get rid of our dichotomies and conceptualizations of secular religious, that perhaps a secular will bully more than a religious one, or vice versa. We need to think about some new horizons and some new conceptualizations where we put in the center the distinction between conservatism and liberalism. I can tell you about myself. I'm religious, but I'm very liberal. I think that I am one of the most liberal people in the whole world. So from this point of view, you will never catch me saying stupid things or fundamental things about anything in the world. And it doesn't have to do with my religiosity. On the other hand, I can tell you that I'm sitting together with secular scholars who are practically fundamentalists. They are so narrow-minded, it's unbelievable. And we have to make sure that they don't have have any touch with it. And I think that this is one of the main messages of our new book, State SRE in Government Schools in Australia, which was published recently by Springer. And I think that this is something that we have to adopt to ourselves, adopt and adapt to our new educational conceptualization. And that's why I think that this webinar is so crucial and so important. And that's why I really want to thank to the audience who raised up this question, which is extremely, extremely important. And we should take into account also this specific issue, which I raise now, concerning conservatism versus fundamentalism. About it, and you.
Thanks very much, Zahavat. We do have a couple of questions, so perhaps some quick responses to these. Carol has asked how much of the bullying is a result of parents' prejudices at home. Do we have any sense of that, Suzanne?
Well, as I said, I think that it's a mixture. I think on the one hand, kids can pass down through the playground. I mean, that's, parents don't throw coins in front of, or that type of action. So it's obviously something that children are learning in the playground rather than at home. But on the other hand, the home environment is also crucial, absolutely crucial in this, because the children are more exposed to prejudices at home. So I think it can be a combination, peer pressure, peer attitudes, but also parental attitudes. I don't know, Zabit, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think that attitude and home pressure and home, I mean, whatever you are bringing is actually has a direct connection with what, with your primary socialization. Primary socialization is a crucial issue, of course. And if you are surrounded with the stereotypical comments at home, you will bring it to the classroom, you will bring it to the playground. And here we come, we as teachers, we educate our students. Of course, they are bringing the home prejudice and the stereotypes, but that's why we have the conceptual and educational tools to combat it. And we should do it intendedly and systematically, because we can overcome all these things. I mean, if we want to improve this world, we must start with stereotype prejudice. This is the first thing that we have to take into account. I can tell you a story, a real story from here now in Lod, which is a mixed city in Israel, in the center of Israel, where we have Arab, Palestinian, and Jewish people who are sitting here and living here together. And recently we had a huge war here in Lod. And today I came to this conference. I was invited to a special conference which is organized by the President of Israel. And with whom I came? With a Palestinian who lives in a Palestinian village next to me, Kfar Qasim. When I went home, when I went from my home today in the morning, when I left my home, my husband said, "What? You're going with a Palestinian? You're foolish. What's going on with you?" The neighbor who took me, who gave me a lift to the central bus station, told me, "What? Get out of my car. You're going to go with a Palestinian Muslim?" I told him, "Listen, what's going on with you?" That's the new thing. I mean, they are coming with their stereotypes and prejudice, and that means that we are at a dead end. Only courageous people, courageous religious people, Muslim and Jewish people, who are going to meet together and initiate projects together will improve this world. And this is our obligation, to abolish and combat those stereotypes that people are coming with to the classrooms. This is really our role in this, and this is really the main message of our new book and our webinar. And we should take it seriously into account. and it is doable. We should do training and do what yeah.
Thanks, Harvard. Carmel asks, I was surprised by the principal's responses that bullying's expected behaviour. Do you have any data on the age demographic with that attitude? That's a specific question. Was it an old principal, or did you find it across the age ranges, or did you get some sense that this is a dated perspective, or is it so part of the public setting?
Terry, we don't have enough data to really answer that question. However, what I can say that was really disturbing was that in 2019, there were two really serious issues of religious bullying in Melbourne. And in both cases, and I don't know the age of the principals in those two schools, one was a high school, one was a primary school, there was total denial from the principals that the child was being bullied because of their religion. And yet in one case, there was a 5-year-old boy who was being bullied about being circumcised and got frightened to go to the toilet, and the principal's denying it had anything to do with religion. So I think it's what the principals are saying more, that this is bullying. It's not related to religion or racial issues.
Yeah.
I think that's more the message. And therefore, well, yes, kids get bullied. This is normal. That's the type of message that's there. Yes, bullying's
and that's a bit of...
But, sorry, Terry?
I was going to say it's a bit of a blind spot generally, isn't it, across society, certainly in Australia, because we don't have good religious education, we don't have good religious literacy, so people will default to ascribing these things to something else. It's just young people being young people or whatever it might be. It just underscores the need for religious literacy to understand all sorts of things that are happening in our society. We have an anonymous question that asks...
Terry, that's a great question. And, we as scholars, Terry, we know each other. You are my mentor, actually. And
I'm not that old.
Yeah, and Terry, I must tell you, we always have this question: should we conduct a quantitative study or a qualitative study? So when we come to the question of bullying, I would like to say, as a scholar who is working with the statistics for many years, let's get rid of statistics. Come with me to the playground. Let's conduct qualitative studies and come with me and see how it works in action. And believe me, in ground suffering, girls with hijabs were tortured, and the Jewish students and Christian girls, they are threatened, they are intimidated. This is a catastrophe. And when I went to the principal, he said, that's a regular violence between children in the playground. Oh, come on, what's going on? That means blindness. We are not allowed to be blind to this phenomena. We need to be brave enough to acknowledge this phenomena and to deal with it practically in the classroom.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. It's what we do in education generally, isn't it? A good school is a place where all the features of life are put on the table. But somehow or other, certainly in Australia, religion got off to a bad start for all sorts of 19th century reasons that we don't seem to have grown out of. Maybe one of these days we will. There's an anonymous attendee who asks, what can our SRE providers do to educate our own SRE teachers about this matter? How can they help students who are being bullied, those who are attending their SRE classes? That's a big question, but do you have a couple of thoughts?
Again, just coming back that, I'll just stop this binging. Coming back to what we were saying before about care, concern, we did find that the students also, the teachers, sorry, who we interviewed, all said that they felt that they could help their students in the SRERI classes by providing, and it was in one of the diagrams we showed, of care, creating amongst the students this sense of belonging. Sense of belonging, by the way, is very important, and one of the studies has shown with Pew that the young people's sense of belonging, and this is generally from a quantitative study, it's, Australian schools is going down, which is very worrying because sense of belonging is very important for education to be effective. So the SRE teacher can actually do a lot to assist the kids who are being bullied, to give them the freedom to speak about it, to understand, and to create, as Abed said, that sense of security for them, to give them the strength to accept, look, this is part of life, but I'm not going to let it upset me. I'm going to be proud of who I am and continue to be proud of my religious background. Zavid, you might want to add something. We have
I would like just to add that we are not allowed as scholars and as human beings to be indifferent to children's sufferings in the playground. This is really our obligation. As scholars, we should highlight it, speak about it, and put religion on the table and not under the table. This is really our true new mission and obligation as educators and as human beings.
And by the way, Zabit's referred to our book. We discussed all of these issues, obviously, in much greater detail. It's published by Springer this year, looking at the value of SRE in contemporary Australia.
Thank you very much. One final comment comes from Andrea, who says, thanks for your responses. I'm American, and there's a lot of proselytizing in my homeland, which could be construed as bullying in the playground, which I guess is just the flip side of the point you were making, Zahavat, about the secularist bully. Religious people can obviously be bullies as well. It comes down to narrowness versus, being liberal.
And from Emma, there's a very important comment about the denial by principal of a prestigious school in Sydney, when a few of the students from the school in a nearby cafe during Ramadan said, this is the best time to kill Muslims because they're fasting, so they're hungry, weak and defenseless. So maybe that's a way to end from inner, and I've referred, I think it's really important to look at the study there on Islamophobia, because that's impacting, as you heard from our presentation, very badly on young Muslims in Australia.
Yes, thank you very much. I mean, there's a bleak aspect to all of this, but I guess the optimistic perspective is that education can make a difference, as it can about everything. And that's the message. These things are not being done well in our schools at the moment. It's an urgent need, kind of the sort of world we live in and the issues. And our educational responses, by and large, with some exceptions, have not been as informed as they could be. Well, thank you very, very much for disseminating your research in the way that you have, and more power to you. And let's hope that the book helps to fill some of that information gap. Thank you very, very much, Suzanne and Zahavat. Lovely to see you and be working with you.
Thank you, and thank you to the participants.
Shalom, thank you very much. Thank you very much, and shalom from Israel.
Yes, lovely to have you here, Zahavat. Bye.
Yeah.